Hey everyone, it's Tom here. I hope you all had a really good weekend. And I'm just bringing in the part two of the four-part series with regards to the craziest astrology that we've ever seen anybody alive on the planet, and probably generations before us and generations after us. Okay. So we just had a week of Sun, Mars, Venus conjunction moving together at about the same rate, moving into an opposition with retrograde Jupiter that's exalted in Cancer. This was going to cause a lot of instability that I had mentioned, and of course, we've seen a lot that's going on this week. And like I said, it's a lot that's happening behind the scenes. Okay, now as we go into this week, this grouping, the Sun, Mars, Venus, and a little bit of Mercury, they're going to start moving towards a trine with Uranus. Okay, this is going to bring a certain amount of, like, I always think of Top Gun and Maverick. Okay, Uranus has a lot of Maverick energy. Okay, and it's going to bring that to the forefront. All right, so let's see what's been happening right now. Well, we've had Iran's revolution well underway, going beyond previous riots, protests that were brutally suppressed. This time we've got cities falling, mosques burning. We've got hijabs being tossed into fires, women dancing, anti-regime demonstrations by Iranians all over the Western world. Yet at the same time, we've got this brutal suppression of the resistance in some areas, and like a total internet blackout and jamming of Starlink. Okay, so there have been reports of thousands of Iranians that have died in the last 48 hours even. So, you know, the evidence is there. Okay, and it appears that there's going to be also some significant military buildups happening. We've seen a lot of military flights, aircraft taking its path to the Middle East over the last several days. We've seen Israel make a lot of statements about how they're behind the Iranian people. The reason I really focus on Iran is because we have to understand they have been in an Islamic state for over 45 years. All right, so most of my lifetime, they've been stuck in a really repressed situation, and then of course have been creating proxy organizations throughout the world and being kind of this arm of terrorism that has been happening for decades. Okay, so this Iranian revolution that's happening right now is probably part of this kinetic, we are in motion and there's nothing that really can be stopped. So it's going to be interesting to pay attention to how this develops this week. We also had military action against ISIS in Syria, Lebanon, Ukraine, all intensifying. And then again, what we've got going on here is the media and governments are saying things, outwardly, but again, way more going on behind the scenes. So we've got NATO, okay, that seems kind of threatened enough by what the U.S. is doing with Greenland. And so there's an action being led right now with the UK and France to send a military presence to deter these U.S. interests in Greenland. Now, again, Greenland, we can take a look at these actions from an old system perspective, an old world perspective. Oh, this is imperialism. This is colonialism. This is a fight for resources. This is just a fight for land. Some of these things might have some truth to them, okay? But there's also been a lot of geophysical changes, and there's a lot more room in the Arctic to move your boats around. And China and Russia have been doing this a lot lately for the last several years. So we need to kind of step back and take a more geographic, geopolitical, economic perspective on some of this interest going on with Greenland. Depending on who's reacting, you can really understand a lot. Okay, so what else in the world? We've got Nicaragua making some democratic moves, letting go of some political prisoners. We've got Venezuela awaiting the dropping of U.S. sanctions so that they can really join and start their new economic direction. So a lot has happened in just the course of a week. I mean, I haven't even mentioned the protests going on in the U.S. with regards to, ICE interactions. We had an ICE interaction with a Minnesota citizen that ended in the loss of her life. And there's all sorts of fallout from what happened there. And there's a lot of different perspectives of what you can see in what we're all looking at in this footage. So, there's a lot of things happening. And really, if you want to fly to the top, the chess pieces really aren't just positioning anymore, okay? You can take a look at the board now, the chessboard, and see signs of intent, motivation, alliance building, alliance weakening, okay? So let's think about China for a second. China is the ultimate target of many of these moves. You may not think that, but it's becoming very clear. You have to understand why China's been making the moves it's been making over the last couple of decades, especially the last decade. All right. It's clear the U.S. is also distancing itself from a very deteriorating EU and NATO economic, military, financial, geopolitical, like quagmire of globalist agendas. And you're seeing this through like mass immigration fraud, silencing free speech, through arrests of just comments on social media. And then there's also at this point a threatening of free speech in the U.S. by a coordinating effort by Canada, the UK, and Australia to ban X, the X platform. And it kind of seems like the U.S. relationship with Russia has more going on than meets the eye, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. And to bring up this date that I'm about to talk about here, we have to understand that the February 17th to 20th, that first date range that I gave in this series, that's officially heralding in a new era. So those aging institutions and systems like that we've been, dealing with our entire lives, they've been established for generations. Whatever cracks that's been forming right now are definitely going to start crumbling all around us. So going through March, reality is probably going to seem a little different than before February 17th to 20th. Okay. So it's really not until we get to April that we have this second really crazy configuration. Okay. So I'm going to put it up on the screen here. April 16th, we have a new moon, but it's not just any new moon. All right. So this new moon, which is when the moon and the sun are conjunct, they're going to conjunct in Aries. Now, we've talked a lot about Aries, right? It's the first sign of the zodiac. It is an active fire sign ruled by Mars. Not a lot of emotion happens in Aries. It is just action. Let's just go and do this. A lot of times you can think of Mars as the general, the one that's got to make the decisions without emotion, right? So like a general sending their troops out to battle. He or she is taking that decision as much without emotion as possible. Okay. Now, Aries, when you've got the sun and moon in there, and then you add everything that you're seeing on the screen here, okay, 7 celestial objects total. All right. So we just talked about the sun and the moon. We've also got, let's just start from the beginning. Neptune at 2 degrees, Mercury at 3 degrees, Mars at 5 degrees, Saturn at 7 degrees. That's 4 planets within a 5-degree conjunction. And then we move over to where the new moon is, and you'll see that Chiron, okay, which is more of like, it's not a planet, all right? So it's more something that you wouldn't consider a traditional planet in the traditional sense of astrology, but it is an object that over time has formulated a paradigm around what it means. And what it means is more about inner wounds, the inner child stuff. And we'll get to that, okay? But think about this. The sun is our foundation. It's our soul. The moon is our emotions and our feelings, okay? Then you add Mercury, the intellect, Mars, the will, okay? Saturn, structure. And then Neptune, which is kind of like the sea of illusion and fog. And then just to add a little dash of excitement, we're also watching Venus just get past the exactness of a conjunction with an anorectic Uranus, which means that Uranus is in the last degree of Taurus before it jumps for 7 years into Gemini. All right. So what does this all mean? This is like an identity reboot. Okay. Under fire and foggy conditions, really, with that Neptune. So some might even say this, you could call it like the fog of war, right? Neptune can be seen as propaganda, mass emotion, fog, myth. And then, Saturn we've talked about is reality and consequences and commitments. If it wasn't clear which side was which, who's who and who's on whose team, this new moon combination is probably going to reveal quite a bit. Yet it's probably going to confuse others. And it's probably most likely those who have been under a longer spell are going to get a lot more confused. Now, the Mercury and Mars, okay, in Aries, this is words become weapons. Now, remember, Aries is ruled by Mars, and it just so happens to be in its own house and its own sign when this new moon happens. So these words that are going to get a little bit more weaponized, decisions will also be made that are irreversible. Aries is going to bring a lot of speed, direct action, thoughts turning into decision. Okay, speech is going to sound more like action. Now, again, I always try to talk objectively, right? That stuff is necessarily neither good nor bad. It's how we obviously perceive it through our conditioning and our level of self-awareness. So there can be really brilliant breakthroughs that can happen, or, you know, at the same time, reckless consequences that could become reality. So let's add Chiron to this kind of thought here. You know, this wounded self dynamic is now going to get triggered by this new moon. You know, so think about, you know, feelings coming up in individuals and in collective nations. Am I strong enough to act? Do I have the right to initiate these new actions? I mean, these vibes are going to be completely and utterly initiatory. All right. Aries initiates. Courage starts getting demonstrated. It just depends what you deem your courage is truly facing. That's going to be the key as to where your courage is pointed. All right. Neptune and Aries can bring some heroic narratives, literal crusades, collective inspiration, okay, or delusion. It's a fight for the dream energy. Just depends on, you know, whose dream you're in, and do you think it's a nightmare? All right. 10 days later, Uranus is going to enter Gemini for the next 7 years. And it's literally going to be conjuncting boundary enforcing Venus. But before that, Uranus at 29 degrees, it acts as a second ignition with Venus to this new moon. Okay, boundaries are definitely going to start being enforced with Venusian, just say no. Venus is about what we desire, cherish, and want. Okay, so Venus and Uranus is also sudden pivots. There's going to be relationship pivots, and this isn't just on an an individual level. It's going to happen internationally, collectively. So don't be surprised if by now we're seeing the last sputters of NATO or the EU, or even on some levels the United Nations, okay? Because these alliances are shifting quicker than we can keep track, all right? The pivots are really going to say with Uranus and Venus, like, I can't do this anymore, right? Venus also has to do with money. So there can also be market and value repricing that starts around this time. I mean, the overall arching of Venus and Uranus together would be like, I want freedom more than comfort. Comfort being the root Venus need, right? What we cherish, what we desire, what we love. But at some points, sometimes you just want to be free. And I guess we can all relate to what's going on in certain countries around the world with people that we might know that live in these places. We're associated with those countries. It's a very, very fluid and dynamic time right now. So again, in closing, this is like a collective energy reboot. All right. It is going to come in hot and fast. All right. Even like spiritual movements are going to harden and make moves during this time. I would definitely expect information warfare to spike. Okay. So remember your center, remember your discernment. Okay. You get guidance from within, not out there. You can't find another example of this in history. Okay. Based on our current tools. Like, we're talking thousands of years here. I went back to a time when I saw 6 celestial entities in Aquarius, but it's nothing like this. All right. So let's all have a good week, and part 3 is on the way. Thanks.